Now I'd like to contain us here, inside the perimeter of my grandmother's historic Chinatown.
Carroll Street to the west.
So this production weaves and entwines many different modes of expression. My form is dance, and in this I'm also storytelling.
665 East Pender, my mother's childhood home.
But there's shadow puppetry and shadow painting. There's oral landscapes. There's a whole narrative that happens just orally.
My grandparents, Harry and Lynn Chin, golden aged court.
And then there's food, and there's the senses, and there is lighting design that plays a key element, of course, when we're working with shadow, but also in the theater.
After 2 weeks, the doctor gathered together Lynn's children and asked them to consider removing life supports.
And then there's also divination. And the divination part of it is where the magic and the spirit element kind of comes in, and this reaching across to the past or into the future. And also, all of the stories are set against and alongside these charts that are part of traditional Chinese medicine and also Chinese astrology, so the zodiac chart, or I guess I should say cosmology, because there isn't really, the zodiac isn't of the sky. It is very much of the earth and the animals. So I am fourth generation Vancouver, Chinatown. My great-grandmother was brought here as a child, as a servant. And so my grandmother was born here, my mom was born here.
When I was little, my papa and I used to make dumplings together. Her dumplings were so delicious.
And these streets have typically, like even at the time when my great-grandmother was brought here, there were very few women. It was primarily men, laborers, and then because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, there were not families here. So there were many, many men, very few women, very few children, but my mom and my grandmother were part of that community.
My grandparents moved back here to Chinatown. My dad took a job at the University of Hong Kong and moved overseas. My brother...
So the stories of the women of these streets are few, and they also were not often upheld or shared or celebrated in any way. It was a very male-dominated society here, and even in this, in the stories that live on in the history books, a lot of them, when we look at those stories, there's a male perspective.
If an Asian person had approached me and said, "Hey, what's your sign?" I would have told them, I am a fire horse. And it's
the underlying themes of the work are women's silence and the silencing of voices, particularly the voices of women, and particularly those of Chinese heritage. So it's challenging, it's frightening, and I think I have to build up my courage, my firehorse energy, in order to step in front of people to tell these stories, which were stories that were held sealed and contained for my life.
The year is 1976. Andrea is in the 5th grade, and her teacher, Georgina Lorne, has just choreographed an exciting and demanding new dance for the class. It could be a great outlet.
And in the process of making this work, it was really interesting because there were many other stories that came forward from my family. And as I started to write these stories and to share them and to tell them with my cousins or uncles and aunts or with my mom, it became really clear that some of those stories weren't mine to tell. And when we're doing autobiographical work, I think that was one of the biggest lessons, and something I'm still learning and something I'm still always checking in with others who are implicated in the stories or who have their own experience inside of those stories, to make sure that what I'm sharing is my own lived experience and that I'm not putting anyone else's lived experience forward.
And now I would like to introduce you to my mom, Beverly Nann, in 1986. She was 4 years younger than I am now and full of hope.
I really began to feel then my Chinese heritage was an asset rather than a deficit. I know my parents did the very best job they could do.
I know that when my mom was growing up, assimilation was their goal. And so that's why we didn't speak Chinese in the house. We didn't, like, most of our meals were Western meals. Everything that we did was more aligned with the Western, like, culture. And so this idea of mainstreaming was an intention that my mom really wanted for us so that we would feel like we belonged. But I still had and have this appearance and this background and all of these cells inside of me that are from and informed by a different culture. And that culture was not valued and not even, was kind of, I always felt like I was wanting or needed to be invisible somehow. And so that's part of why I also never spoke up. And I had this huge paradox inside me because I had this firehorse energy, but I also had this sense of myself as being very different from others, and that I kind of felt ashamed of the way that I am. So, yeah.
Has that changed? Has it changed more recently or not really?
I think it's changing right now. Like these times that we're in are extraordinary times, and through all of the really tragic events of the past few years, there is suddenly now an emphasis on creating safe spaces for BIPOC artists, for people who have traditionally been living on the margins or seeking equity in other ways. And I think there's been a lot of loss that has led us to this point, but I'm really grateful to be in a time now when there is a place for me to feel like I can have my real voice and my real presence coming forward and being received by others.
My papa was one of the first generation of Chinese babies born in Canada. As a young woman, she was described as warm, friendly, and unassuming. She was widely loved by her family and her whole community because, in their words, she was unobtrusive, non-directive, and undemanding by nature.
So Firehorse and Shadow is this presentation, and it also exists as a larger community activation. So through Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Exploration and the Chinatown Storytelling Center, we have been connecting with community members who are living and working here in historic Chinatown or who have had a history here. And so there are a few different ways that people can reach us. You can go to the website at dreamwalkerdance.com and look for the Firehorse and Shadow Community Activations page. And you'll find information about workshops where we are running workshops that are, again, multimodal, so that we are inviting people to dive into the stories that are held within them, not just by sitting and talking, but by moving together and by eating together and sharing time together. working in shadow play, walking the streets of Chinatown and talking. So there's some workshops like that happening, but there are also ways that you can participate anonymously. If you feel that there's something that you want to share, you can call a hotline. There's a number that we'll put up, hopefully, for you, and that number you can call in and leave an anonymous story, or you can attribute to the story if you wish. We also have this giant dumpling that is on a tour. Currently it's at Richmond Cultural Centre in the foyer. It will also be coming to Centre 8 Gallery and visiting some of the cultural centres in and around this area before arriving at Chinatown Storytelling Centre for Light Up Chinatown. So just keep visiting, go back to the website for information about how you can share your stories with us. We would love to receive your stories.
I think of Lindley often when I'm with my mom Beverly now, and I hope that Lynn can feel the expanse and freedom of our bold self-expressions. I know this is what she wanted for her children and for the generations of daughters to come.